I'm Julie Holland.
And I'm Nick Spacek.
We're the hosts of The Carnage Report, a horror news podcast, part of the Cinepunks Podcast Network.
Every other Thursday, we bring you the latest news you can use on horror movies, casting, production, re-releases, trailers, and more.
We also do a deep dive into a movie new to streaming or theaters, giving you our thoughts and opinions on whether you should check it out.
Toss in recommendations for similar movies and a whole lot of commentary, and it's all the horror news you can use.
The Carnage Report is on Twitter and Instagram at Report Carnage.
Find us at cinepunks.com, that's CINEPUNX, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Howdy, folks. My name is Owen Brand.
And I'm Katie Cadaver.
And we are co-hosts of the VHS Vault podcast, where old is new and cringe is king. We are a podcast dedicated to bringing you old and obscure movies from deep in the vault.
That's right. You can listen to us on Spotify, Amazon Music, and on Planet Rage Radio Thursdays at 8 p.m. Central on the Live 365 app. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And email us at vhsvaultpodcast@gmail.com.
The Shameless Picture Show is part of the Cinepunks Network. If you like the Shameless Picture Show and you want to hear other great shows like it, make sure you check out the Cinepunks Network. You can find them at www.cinepunks.com. That's CINEPUNX. There's other great shows such as Cinepunks. There's The Carnage Report, Cinema Smorgasbord, Fat Girl Hacks, Loud, Fast, Philly, Tomb of Ideas, and Twitch of the Death Nerve, and so much more. If you like punk rock and you like movies, make sure to go to www.cinepunks.com. And let's not forget the sponsors for the Cinepunks Network. We have the Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. They are the premier screen printer of the Lehigh Valley with service to the whole country, professional and personable in a way that only a DIY business can be. They also have ridiculously low prices for whatever your screen printing needs may be. You can visit them online at xlvacx.com. That's xlvacx.com. Lehigh Valley Apparel Creations. We also have the Essex Coffee Roasters. All their coffee is roasted to order. They have high quality beans, bunch of apparel, and tea available. They are bringing high quality coffee to the masses without the pretentiousness. Use the code CINEPUNKS for 10% off your first order. You can visit them at www.essexcoffeeroasters.com. That's ESSEX, coffeeroasters.com. Once again, use the code CINEPUNKS for 10% off your first order. One of our newer sponsors here at the Shameless Picture Show is Kino Lorber. With a library of over 4,000 titles, Kino Lorber Incorporated has been a leader in independent art house distribution for 35 years, including 30 films per year theatrically under its Kino Lorber, Kino Repertory, and Alive Mind Cinema banners, garnering 7 Academy Award nominations in 9 years. In addition, the company brings over 350 titles yearly to the home entertainment and educational markets through physical and digital media releases. With the expanding family of distributed labels, Kino Lorber handles releases in ancillary media for Zeitgeist Films, Milestone Films, Cohen Media Group, Greenwich Entertainment, Artsploitation, Palisades Tartan, Raro Video, and others, placing physical titles through all wholesale, retail, and direct-to-consumer channels, as well as direct digital distribution through over 40 OTT services, including all major TVOD and SVOD platforms. If you'd like more information on Kino Lorber and all the great titles they're putting out, be sure to check them out at www.kinolorber.com. That's KINOLORBER.com. KinoLorber.com.
Warning! This movie podcast actually discusses movies. Be aware that it may discuss any of the following elements: endings, surprise twists, unexpected cameos, and all manner of spoilers. If this doesn't appeal to you, why listen to a movie podcast? Without further ado, please enjoy our feature presentation, The Shameless Picture Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Shameless Picture Show. I am your host, Michael Viers, and today we are joined by a very special guest. Today, I have the award-winning writer-director, Maggie Greenwald. Maggie Greenwald, for those of you who may not be familiar, is, as I said, a writer-director. Her film Sophie and the Rising Sun premiered at Sundance in 2016 as the Salt Lake City Gala world premiere. This was Greenwald's third film in the festival. Her other features as writer-director include The Kill-Off from 1990, adapted from the Jim Thompson novel and described by the British Film Institute as one of the 100 best American independent films. Her groundbreaking 1993 Western, which I just saw for the first time, Ballad of Little Jo, which was recently re-released by KILL-OFF in 2023, and the award-winning Songcatcher, which played at 2000 Sundance and won the award for ensemble performance. Greenwald's numerous TV movies include What Makes a Family, which received a GLAAD award, Tempted, and the Christmas classic Comfort and Joy for Lifetime. She also directed Get a Clue for Disney Channel, Good Morning Killer for TNT, and her recent foray into episodic directing includes Madam Secretary. Sorry, I misread that. Madam Secretary and Nashville. I thought there was a space after in secretary, so I was like, "What's secret airy?"
I don't know. Was there a typo in that?
No. I think it's just the font I was using. Just like, oh, I must have misread that. So, how are you doing, Maggie?
I'm good. Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you. I jumped on the chance to have you on this show because when I get all the press release information from KILL-OFF. And I'm really touched that I even on that list because we're a relatively small show. I've been doing this for about 8 years, and while we're not nearly on the level of some of the bigger cinema podcasts out there, I feel like I like to believe I make up for it with just pure passion. I went to film school myself, and have just my problem always has been in my world, in my journeys through film, is I want to do it all. It wasn't just enough for me to try making films. I wanted to be involved in film culture. I do reviews when I can. I write for websites. At one point I even looked into trying to get into film restoration. I just want to do it all.
I think those are different parts of the brain.
It very well could be, and I do. And as you know, filmmaking can be sometimes you have long stretches in between doing things. So that's why I started doing this show, just as a way to keep me moving while I was waiting for projects. Yeah,
well, it's a good idea.
Yeah. So as I said, KILL-OFF sent me the information about Ballad of Little Jo, and I'm a big fan of Westerns. And I also love, not that there's many of them, I love when you get the Western written and directed by a female filmmaker, because there's not many. I can think of you and probably Kelly Reichardt, and there's probably a couple more that I'm not thinking of, but those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah, Tamara Jenkins, and I think that's it.
Yeah, not including ones from the silent era, because in the silent era, women had a couple more opportunities than they do now, and there were some pretty prolific filmmakers during the silent period. But
we were doing everything, but I don't know of a Western, but maybe there is one. But I do, as far as I know, I was the first American woman, anyway, to write and direct a Western.
And that's so. Since we're talking about the Ballad of Little Jo, and as I said, Kino gave me the opportunity to see the movie, and then offered me the opportunity to sit and chat with you. Tell me a little bit about the Ballad of Little Jo and where the idea to make a Western came from, especially in 1993 when they weren't in vogue. They haven't been in vogue for a while.
No. Well, yes and no, because that's also maybe that's the film that brought them back into vogue. Was Ballad came out in 1993, which I think Unforgiven came out at the same time. So, everybody we go through phases where people say, no, Westerns aren't in anymore. But really, what Westerns are always in to Americans. I mean, if there's a good Western that comes out, people love it. It's just it's our culture. It's our...
And I imagine
our genre as Americans, and people all over the world just love them. So I didn't think about that, but as an independent filmmaker, I never thought about what was in style.
No.
Usually things came into style after I made them, not, I never quite hit the mark, but
Yeah,
usually it came before. But
it's interesting. You can just kind of track, like, because it obviously had its heyday.
yeah,
But it's funny. I remember hearing a story of John Ford talking about when he made Stagecoach. Westerns was an unpopular genre when he was making that. They thought, because he had pushback when he was making Stagecoach, and they're like, "Why do you want to make a Western? Everything that's been said that could be said about Westerns has been said already."
and that was, what was that, like 1933 or something like that?
Yeah, so at that time they're all like, "Why are you going to waste your time with this?"
Cool.
But like you said, Westerns, it's less that they are less popular and more, like you said. I think when a good one hits, it does really well. And like, if you look at when your film came out, that's coming off the trail of the miniseries Lonesome Dove. So I'm sure people were, because that was a very popular show or
Yes.
miniseries, and I'm sure that kind of helped bring it back into people's the forefront of their mind a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure when Ballad came out that people were quite ready for a Western written and directed by a woman with, what was labeled, not as a positive thing, but labeled a feminist Western for the most part. So,
how do you feel about that label?
What?
How do you feel about that label?
Well, it is, because I am. I didn't set out to make a feminist Western. I set out to. I'd always wanted to make a Western. I love Westerns. I've always really connected to the genre and the whole kind of spiritual search, that's embodied in a lot of the stories. In the landscape of the American West. And so I knew I wanted to make a film about a woman because I didn't feel like the world needed me to make another movie about a man and in the West. And so, I set about looking for a story. At the time, I didn't really connect with the stories of women who might be like the Grace Kelly character in High Noon, and was looking for something, I guess, that I connected with, which would inherently be feminist.
Yeah.
Not consciously, but just because that's who I am.
So the story the Ballad of Little Jo is inspired off of the real life story of Josephine Monahan. Where did you first hear about this story, or did you go looking for it?
Well, I this is back in the pre-internet days. I mean, I just used to go to the library and scour shelves for books, and I don't even, Michael, I don't remember where I saw the article, but there was somewhere in some book in the Western section in some library in New York City, there was a mention of Little Jo Monahan and this, about unusual women in the West, and a newspaper article that was published on her death that talked about this little kind of sounded like a lonesome ranch hand who lived a pretty meager life on a small homestead, actually in Idaho. And that when he died, it was discovered that he was a woman, and among his few possessions, their possessions, were a couple of letters from a sister back from Buffalo, New York, and and talk about a son that Jo had had out of wedlock. And I just knew as soon as I read this, I was like, this is my story. This is the premise for the story I want to tell. And what I decided I was interested in, probably because nothing was known about Jo and I was going to make it all up, was the concept, of characters in the West, of making a legend, like, Jesse James or Wyatt Earp, or all these characters from the West that, whose legends have very little to do with their real biographies. And, but, nothing was known about Little Jo, but she seemed, really fascinating. And I was really intrigued by what might make a woman, assume the identity of a man and then choose to spend her whole life in that identity. Is sort of one thing to decide for whatever reason that you're going to dress as a man for a while, but then to live your whole life as a man. So, I started writing and made the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, and that was one thing when I was doing some research on the film and looking at other people's critiques and reviews of the film. I often see people commenting on historical inaccuracies with the movie, and that always sat weird with me for a couple of reasons. One,
like what?
They didn't. For something, if they, a lot of times they didn't give examples. They're like, oh, that's not how it happened.
Actually pretty historically. I mean, in terms of the period and all of that, it's pretty accurate. But.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about the story, but the reason I love movies like this that are based on real people is it gives you an entryway to then take the information that you've been told and dig deeper. But what I did take umbrage to that, even though I didn't know if that is in fact the case, if it's quote unquote inaccurate or what have you. But then I was also thinking, like, from what I've come to understand about this person, there was not a lot of information out there.
No, there's nothing.
Them. And so it did give you runway to tell the story as you see fit. But at the same time, I was thinking the fact that this was stuck in some people's craw is weird for me, considering that's what the genre of Westerns have always been.
Well, I'm curious to see what articles you saw, because I mean, there was quite a lot of kind of when the film was released in 1993, there was a lot of press that was very angry at me for, negatively portraying men.
I didn't think that.
Well, I'm just telling you what happened at the time, but I'm curious what you read, because I've never before been accused of historical inaccuracy.
Well, I will say a lot of it was the comments about the historical inaccuracies came less from articles and more so from viewer reviews.
Okay.
So that's what I'm like. That's what I like. Yeah, I almost wanted them to cite their sources but.
Yeah, I would like them to also. I'd like to know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, let me see if I'll see if I can pull some of them up, because now that we're talking about it, but the reason even if it was, say if you took liberties with it, who you said ultimately who cares? Because I'm going to keep using John Ford as an example because he's intrinsically tied to the Western. He even admits when he made My Darling Clementine, which is about the shootout at the OK Corral. People have commented to him that, like, oh, well, some of this stuff is not how it was portrayed. And he has always been famously said, I'm not here to be accurate. I'm here to tell the myths of the West. And then two, he also commented, he's like, I know what's inaccurate. He's like, I had Wyatt Earp on set. Not for that movie, but one of his early silent pictures, because Wyatt Earp was still alive at that time. He's like, I know what happened there. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I'm with John Ford. I don't care either. So, I mean, it's okay with me if someone found that I used like a wrong gun or whatever. I don't know what, but I don't care either.
Yeah. And because, like, ultimately what I found myself really gravitating towards with this movie is I just got really swept up in not only the performances, but I also love when I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. So, because of filmmakers like less John Ford, but say someone like Bud Bedecker and such, and Clint Eastwood, the Western genre has always been considered a violent genre, and there is some truth to that because it was a very violent time, and a lot of filmmakers glorified that aspect of it. But I almost felt like what I loved about your film is, while there was these moments of grotesqueness that came from from characters, there was also, you didn't fall into a lot of the trappings that other Westerns did. Sometimes you watch Westerns and you're kind of like waiting for, the shootout scene or this or that. And I love that it was just like a little slice of life movie about this woman finding her path and living her own true life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the story, and the violence is the violence is committed out of, need to survive in the film. There's nothing gratuitous in any of the violence. So, it may be a different perspective on the violence. The West was a violent place, and American culture is a violent culture. But it's a different perspective on the violence, I guess.
Yeah, and I found myself appreciating that because I was, expecting one thing. I got something completely other, because at the same time, I also intentionally did no research into this movie before watching it because I wanted to go in completely blind. I knew what was said on the blurb from Kino, and that was it. And then, heck, I didn't even know who was in this movie until the credits were rolling. And that is such a refreshing way to watch it.
I love that. I'm glad you did that.
Because I've kind of gotten to the point now where I rarely even watch trailers. I'll sometimes put it on for 30 seconds to get an idea of tonally what the movie might be like, but I don't need to be told the beats. So when I find some of those comments, I'll get back to you on them. I'm scrolling while we're talking, but if they don't come up, they don't come up. So this if I'm reading your filmography correctly, this is your third feature film, correct?
Yes.
So you told me that you've always wanted to make a Western, and I guess I'd love to hear about how this film came together, because Westerns are, any sort of period piece is going to be usually just screams money, and they're not easy to do on a budget. They are possible if you have a lot of ingenuity and creativity, but I'd love to hear about how this came together, how you got some of this wonderful cast, and because I imagine the success of the Kill-Off must have led into that.
Yes, it did. This Kill-Off was made for $200,000, and even though it had, kind of not a very good release in this country, it, the film really launched my career, and also, I guess, because again, not just doing what I like to do. I love Jim Thompson's work, and when I read it, his books were just starting to be reissued at that time, and they'd been out of print for a long time, and I just fell in love with his writing and wanted to make a movie. And so, but it was this first time I was accused of trespassing on male terrain by making a Jim Thompson novel into a film. So, but because the film, in independent film circles and was, highly regarded, I think it established that I could handle what would be considered a male genre, or, something like that. After that, I felt ready to make a Western. I knew, I needed to make a few films first to be ready for the scale and the scope of a Western. I started, the way it came about was I had met the producer, Fred Berner, had sent me a script he'd been looking at because he wanted to make a Western, and he'd sent me a script that, wasn't quite right. And then I came up with this idea, and he lent me his office to work in. And I wrote the first draft in like 3 weeks. It just kind of poured out. And he read it and loved it and asked if he could produce it. And I said, yes, please. And coincidentally, Fine Line Features was down the hall. And Fred was very close friends with Ira Deutschman, who was the head of the brand new Fine Line Features. So Fred took the script, it was like 95-page or 85-page first draft, down the hall to Ira, who read it and committed half of the financing and North American distribution based on that. And then I set to work, really digging into the script further. And it took about 3 years for Ira to find a company that would commit the other financing. The budget was $4 million, which I don't know what that would be today. It was still low budget, but not what $4 million would be today. I don't know, maybe 6 or something like that. So it was still a low budget movie. And, so that, your budget kind of determines who you're going to cast. Or who you're not going to cast. Let's put it that way. Who you're not going to cast. Going out west to be there for 8-10 weeks is, not something big stars want to do. But that wasn't what I was interested in. I felt that on a low budget movie, felt that using really big stars kind of was out of proportion might be out of proportion with the rest of the film. Anyway, so we started auditioning people, and little by little it came together. I mean, I have a background in theater and acting, so I really love wonderful acting, and I love character actors. And being in New York, we had access to a lot of great theater people who also have done film. And it was really, even though Joe is the star of the movie, I always thought of that film, and I think of all of my films really as ensemble pieces.
Oh, yeah.
So, we began the process of putting together the ensemble. And of course, finding Joe was key. And we did auditions in Los Angeles as well as New York. And what of course turned out to be the last day at the time, I didn't know it was the last day, was Susie Amos came in at the end of the day. And, a lot of the other women had sort of dressed up in cowgirl gear when they came in to meet me. And Susie was she just arrived, got off a plane or something, and she came in, and she had then and has now waist-length hair, beautiful strawberry blonde hair, and she had a big bow in her hair, floppy bow, and she had capri pants and these like pink mules on, and she was the antithesis of everybody else sitting in the room. But Susie just had this, androgyny. And she's beautiful, incredibly beautiful and feminine, but also androgynous and very powerful physically. She's kind of athletic. She's tall, and she auditioned, and she was just wonderful. And she and I connected, really got along well, and so kind of everything moved from there. Casting someone like Bo Hopkins. I mean, we were sent his picture and resume, and I'm like, oh my God, it's Bo Hopkins.
I love Bo Hopkins, but I especially love him in this movie.
Well, thank you, because he is just wonderful. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Bo Hopkins from the opening sequence of The Wild Bunch. And, and I also really love him. I I don't remember most of the movie at all, but I remember the sequence of his interrogation in Midnight Express, and he was amazing in that. And,
he's also in The Getaway, and funny enough, he plays a character named Little Joe in a movie, which I think is also really funny.
Does? I didn't know that.
In American Graffiti, he plays Little Joe.
That's so funny.
Little Joe Young, yeah.
He's gone now. He unfortunately passed away like a year before this was released, which is really too bad. He'd have been so thrilled. So it was sort of like that, like combining theater people from New York, like Ruth Malachek, who plays who was, a legendary avant-garde theater performer and director in New York, who plays the shopkeeper in the beginning of the film, or casting Ian McKellen, and then movie people like Bo Hopkins, Renee Auberjonois, Heather Graham. So it was really an amazing process of building the ensemble.
Yeah, and I love it too, because like people like Renee Auberjonois, I can never pronounce his name correctly, but I always try.
Auberjonois.
Auberjonois. Okay. And then him and Ian McKellen had been working so much at that point, but hadn't, like, I don't know if Renee had done Star Trek yet.
No.
Because like that's kind of where he became a household name. Like I know him from The Eyes of Laura Mars, but he hadn't really been a big name. He's kind of like one of those actors. And same thing with Ian McKellen. He had been huge on stage, but hadn't caught.
Yeah, Ian had Renee, interestingly, Renee came in to read for me in Los Angeles, and he had just come from his audition for Star Trek. And he was really nervous because he knew that Star Trek could be his annuity. He was
little did he know.
And he was like, "Yeah, I'll do your movie." He was just like, "Oh."
And I want to just say, you made him unrecognizable from not only the look but the way he performed that character. I didn't I saw his name in the credits, and there's a certain point where I'm like, well, where is he? And then it connected, like, oh, that's him. And there's these moments in the movie that I absolutely love, where every time, and it's probably truthful for what that time period was like, every time that I start to trust a character, especially someone like Renee Auberjonois or Ian McKellen, because I'm used to the other roles.
Yeah,
you're almost like you're casting them against type before they had those types.
That's so sweet. That's such a fabulous thing to say. Thank you. And
then they betrayed my trust every time.
Ian, I think, had only done one movie before that. He was in Scandal, which Miramax had released. He played the politician in Scandal, whose name I forgot, the famous politician. And he was on his famous Richard III tour throughout the United States at that time. He had just been knighted, and he had just come out as gay. So he was sort of getting a lot of attention, but he had never done much film at all. And his agent called and said, "Well, what do you think about Ian McKellen?" And I was like, "He's a stage actor. Like, I don't know." And I was like, "Okay, I'll meet him." And he was performing in Washington, and I went down to see Richard III in Washington, which was, of course, dazzling. And then we got together afterward, and just, we talked. He was kind of like, "Well, what are you going to say to get me in the role?" And I said, "Well, what if this character, has issues about his sexuality?" And he was like, "Okay, yeah." So, we had a great conversation. He just said, "Yeah, I'd love to do this." And, it's really his first substantial film role.
Yeah. Like I'm pulling, I have his, screen and stage listings here, and he'd maybe done some little things before this, but he did this and Last Action Hero in the same year, and then pretty much just kept, a couple years away from this, he did Gods and Monsters, and it just kind of kept building from there. And but no, like there's not a weak performance in the cast that that I can see, and I've spent time directing actors as well, so I have a pretty good eye and ear for that. But what I was saying is, like, you get used to, Joe's betrayals in life started way before this movie began. And I love anytime a movie begins where it feels like we are just coming off another movie and they're beginning almost at the end of another movie. And, so, when you first meet Rene Albert, I keep messing up his name. Aubergenois. Thank you. I'm going to get it by the end of this show.
You already have it.
when we meet him, at first I'm like, I don't trust this guy. And then he lulls me into a sense of trust. And then he betrays her. Same thing with Ian McKellen's character. And then the entire Bo Hopkins character, I kept waiting for that moment. And in the end, he was clearly her best friend.
He loved her.
And just... because especially when Bo Hopkins popped up, because Bo Hopkins he's played everything in Hollywood, but when he pops up, like, you have an idea, especially because the way that you built up these other two male characters in her life, I'm almost on defensive the entire time with him. But then he is the best positive male person in her life, other than I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the character. Tin Man, yeah. So it's just the way that you kind of built these characters up, and because stories work in threes, so I was waiting for the third shoe to drop, and it never did. So all this to say, I really love the movie.
Thank you. I can hear it. I love the things you're saying there. The movie is 30 years old, and, it was a very different time in my life, but I love that you've seen, the film so recently and are making all these same connections and, seeing these things, but also with a different perspective on the actors than I have. It's cool to hear.
So after The Ballad of Little Joe, which for anyone listening, I highly recommend you go pick up the new Blu-ray that Kino Lorber is doing for this movie, because it's
also streaming. So
it's streaming as well, and that's how I watched it. But I'll be definitely picking it up because I like to own the things that I enjoy. So The Ballad of Little Joe, both Susie Amos and David Chung were nominated for best female lead and best supporting male, respectively, at the Independent Spirit Awards. How did The Ballad of Little Joe do? What did it do for your career, and what did you do next?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, an interesting question because it was a very particular time also. The film received very high praise and also some scathing press from people offended by my portrayal of men. And it made no money. Now, I will also say, as much as I loved Fine Line and was so proud to be part of their release, the films that they made, the marketing of the film, I think, was not the right marketing. It was not marketed as a women's story. It was marketed like the trailer looked like a shoot 'em up. And that's not what the film is, and that's not what the best part of the film is. The gunfights are.
I kind of forget there even is gunfights in the movie, to be honest with you.
Exactly. So it was. I do feel as much as I adore Ira, and he's still a good friend, that the marketing department kind of misfired with the marketing. Whether that would have made a difference or not, like, who really knows, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But what the film came out a year later, it came out on HBO, released it on TV. And that's when it really started to pick up momentum and all of that in terms of people seeing it. In terms of my career, it established me as, top tier independent filmmaker. However, something else happened in 1993 that changed the whole film industry for women filmmakers, which is Quentin Tarantino. And Reservoir Dogs came out and made so much money that, it was kind of the third guy film that Miramax put out that made buckets of money and changed the ambitions of independent film financiers and distributors, changed the appetite and expectations of what people could make, like Sex, Lies, and Videotape and the Brothers McMullen. And then Reservoir Dogs just made so much money. And remember, this was Miramax, Harvey Weinstein's heyday, with his entourage of boy geniuses. I put that in quotes. And I'm one of a number of women who didn't make a film for many years after that.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a gap. Like you did, looks like
7 years. But Nancy Savoca, who was highly regarded, and her film that came out in 1993, which Kino also re-released this year, did better, not great, but she didn't make a film for years either. So it was just like we were on the cusp of, and of course the studios weren't going to hire us because we're women.
Mm-hmm.
The studios still don't hire women, so to direct feature films, TV's different. But so it was kind of a shock that at the moment you think you've like broken through to, a place where you can, make work more regularly. The opposite happened. It was like the door slammed in my face. It slammed in many other women's faces.
And I see you were still working during that time. It looked like you were directing TV for Nickelodeon, and you directed a couple episodes for one of my all-time favorite shows, The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Yeah, you actually did one of my favorite episodes, Sick Day.
Inspector 34.
No, Sick Day.
Oh, Sick Day.
Sick Day is one of my all-time favorite. The dental candy just sticks out in my brain.
The shot of it flying, or
the
thing flying out of his nose. Yeah.
So how did that? I've never actually got the chance to talk with anyone who was involved on that show. How did that come to be? How did you get involved?
Well, I wanted to make a living as a director, and so I went to my agents and I said I'd like to direct TV. And at the time, there was I lived in New York.
Yeah,
there was very little shooting in New York. There were 2 Dick Wolf shows shooting in New York, and they didn't really hire women at the time. And so, being a woman who had proved she could direct, there was a fair amount of children's television, because Nickelodeon was in New York, and I got hired to direct an episode of Pete and Pete, and then they brought me back for 2 more episodes, and then from that I got The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo, and I had a fabulous experience. Pete and Pete it's the first time I'd ever worked with a script that wasn't my own.
What's that like?
Well, when the script is Inspector 34 from Pete and Pete, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, it's fantastic. No, I loved the experience of working as a craftsman. I love doing television and getting to, not spend 5 or 10 years developing something and raising the money for it. But really, it's such a wonderful privilege to, and so much fun to just walk into someone's set. The whole thing is there and work as a craftsman, really connect with your, the script in a different way and the actors, and, have fun at someone else's party.
Yeah. So can I ask you a question about directing TV?
Yeah.
So what is obviously your job is to direct, but in its most like raw form, when you come onto someone else's TV show as a director for hire, what would you say is the most important element? And I ask this because so many TV shows have a set style and look and feel. Is there room for you to add your own individual voice, or are you trying to create someone else's vision? Like, because it's different than directing a film where it's your vision. How does this work?
It's very different. I mean, you're going to someone else's party and you're going to kind of behave in a certain way, differently from how you'd behave at your house.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is to tune into what is the show about, what is the tone of the show, what is the vision of the show that already exists, and then I don't have a problem with adjusting to that, but within that, I'm still going to bring me to what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are always ways that that not even on purpose, that Maggie Greenwald's vision is going to manifest in a TV show. So, like, for instance, on Pete and Pete, I did 3 episodes of that wonderful show. And, at one point, one of the creators of the show, I think it was Will, said, what are you doing in the show? Like, your show is always, I really feel like everybody's like really like connected in the ensemble. And I didn't really know. And then I kind of looked at the way I staged things, and I usually put people together and would create kind of tableaus of the characters together rather than cutting. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that was the only thing I could think of. Maybe that's not it, but I thought that was it, that I tied them together in the staging and in my camera movement. I did an episode of Madam Secretary that, which is, I loved working on that show. It was such a wonderful show and really great set to work on. And, I did a scene that was like 8 pages of dialogue between Madam Secretary and in my episode, and the Filipino dictator, kind of modeled a little bit after what's his name, who's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of, just having them sit there and talk, I did the staging where he moves around, kind of distracting her and taunting her and throwing her off guard. That was, kind of inspired at the time by what Donald Trump had done to Hillary Clinton during the debates, where he lurked behind her.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And kind of, so you always had this, like, and she was so cool that after a couple of like being wary, she just was like, screw him, But so I used some of that idea of this male lurking behind this woman to throw her off her power.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and Taya Leone and the producing director loved what I did. They were like, oh my God, we love this staging that you're doing. And I just was so within the context of, and if they didn't like it, they'd have said, that's not working. That's not, you're not in the tone of the show. But I wouldn't be, I've never had that happen. And I think that my job as a guest director is to really tune in to what is the tone of the show. But within that, I can bring, what my vision to things. I also don't feel like I need to express myself particularly in somebody else's show.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the place that I need to, I get to do that in my own work. So I don't, like some TV directors, because that's their only thing, they feel more, more pressure. I'm happy to, I find it interesting to work with someone else's vision and adapt to that and fulfill that. It's interesting.
That sounds great. Like, because I've had quite a few people on this show, and you're the only one I've talked to who has worked in television, and I think it's such an interesting way of working.
It is. It's challenging because there's a lot of personalities. On my own set, when I make a feature, I'm the top of the of the chain of command, right? But when you go on a TV show, director's like way down. There's the showrunner, there's the executive producer, there's the producing director, and sometimes even, the cinematographer is going to try and be more in charge because they know the show really, really well.
Yeah, they're in charge of the look of it.
Yeah.
But
and so the director is not like in the hierarchy of a show. They're not theoretically beneath the cinematographer or the director of photography, but you want them to be your friend.
Yeah, but I imagine
and also when you come on a show, you rely on them because they know the show better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I imagine too, it's also nice kind of having a support net where if you try to, pitch something completely out of the ordinary, you have someone to be like, we don't normally do that on this show. And so when you prepare for a TV show, like, do you, if you're not familiar with the show, do you watch a couple episodes, or how do you prepare?
Well, when I haven't done tons of television. When I have done it, I've watched the whole show from beginning to where my episode is. So I kind of over prepare, so I know where the characters are in there. The main reason I do that is not just to get to know the show, but to know where the characters are in their stories.
Yeah.
Right. So that when I pick up a script, I know what came before. So I know where they are as people, and where my episode is in their, developing character arcs.
Oh, definitely.
So yeah, I watch a lot of episodes of the show.
That's awesome. That's fun. Yeah. That's a great way to go about it. All right. So I don't want to keep you a whole lot longer, but before we go, I want to talk a little bit about, because I've not seen it yet, but I want to talk a little bit about your newest movie that you wrote and directed, Sophie and the Rising Sun.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about that movie? I see that it also played at Sundance, and it had a pretty good festival run, it looks like. What can you tell me about that movie?
Yeah, I mean, there was also SONGCATCHER that came out in 2000. That was in competition at Sundance, and is also, similar in feeling. Sophie and the Rising Sun came out in 2016. It's based on a novel of the same name, and the novel was brought to me by the executive producer Nancy Dickinson, who read the book, which deals, with racism. It's a love story, but deals with racism. And she really wanted to make it into a film. And she'd seen my work and just felt I was the person. And I read this book and went, oh my God, this is like all the characters from my other films converging in kind of different incarnations in this small Southern town in 1941. There were qualities about each of the main characters that kind of reminded me of other characters in earlier work. And I felt like it was also kind of it felt like it was a wrap up of those characters. It's the same casting process as I've described of, really going for the actor. Julianne Nicholson plays Sophie, and Margot Martindale is co-star, and Diane Ladd plays the bigot, the cruel bigot, and Takashi Yamaguchi plays Mr. Ota. So it's, again, an interracial love story between a white woman and an Asian American man, set on the eve of World War II, right before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And, a look at the horrendous racism that occurred in the United States against Japanese Americans after the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Is that movie available?
It is. That one streams on Amazon.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
it's available with your Prime.
Because that's one that I definitely want to see. Well, I want to catch up on your filmography, that a couple of the films that I haven't seen. But I would like to just pick your brain a little bit about how do you go about adapting a book, like someone else's words? How do you find a way to make it your own while still keeping truthful to the source material?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, it's a long process, and really ultimately what you're doing is using the novel as a spine or a skeleton, rather than and being faithful to. I feel that if you try to be literally faithful to a book, you're going to make a really bad movie. And we've seen all those really horrible adaptations of books that we love. But if you really focus on, and it's a long process to adapt a book, if it has any density or something, to eliminate the literary things and the, that you love, and really get at the essence of the human beings, the emotional spine of the story, and then find cinematic equivalents for the words.
And I imagine you have to
get away from the words. You've got to get away from the book.
And I imagine you have to tackle it in a different way, because something, since there's so much that can be said about, a character's internal feelings, you have to find ways to show that cinematically. Yes. I don't remember which screenwriter said this. I feel like it was John August, but I'm not 100% sure. But there was a screenwriter that said something along the lines of, your job when you are adapting a book is not to, as you said, adapt it word for word. Your job is to adapt it so that way people watching it feel the way that you felt when you first read it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the best film adaptations, I think, really, really move away from the books.
Yeah.
Whether it's, like the out of date Gone with the Wind, which is, this needs to be buried now. But I remember early in my screenwriting career reading the book after I'd seen the movie many times, and was like, this is the worst book I've ever read. It just goes on and on and on and on. And she has like 5 children, and, and really what was important was the one child, Bonnie.
My mom always said that Jaws was not nearly as good of a book as it was a movie too.
Well, I never read the book, but I'm sure, nobody talks about the book anymore, but the movie stands up, boy. That is some movie. Yeah. So, I think that's what you have to do. And I teach also, and I teach adaptation. And one of the things that's the hardest for people who are adapting a book that they love is to feel okay with not being faithful, literally faithful to the book, but to be emotionally faithful to the book.
No, that makes complete sense. So before we wrap up for the night, what's on the horizon for you? What are you working on now, if you can talk about it?
Sure. I actually started writing. I thought it would be interesting to expand what I do, and also because of my age. So, and because it takes so much time to get movies done.
Yeah.
I've been writing for another director. I've just been finishing up a screenplay for Patricia Regan, director who did La Misma Luna, and she did The 33, and recently did Dope Sick. I'm finishing up a screenplay for her, which I've been working on for a couple of years, and I'm just starting work on something for myself, which is so like way early. It's too soon to talk about, but so hopefully I'll have something soon again.
No, that's great. Well, I look forward to seeing whatever it is, and I really thank you for your time. I thought this was
Thank you. It was a really fun conversation.
Well, thank you very much. And for as we mentioned before, the Ballad of Little Joe is currently available. If you're like me and you like physical media, it is available on DVD and Blu-ray from Kino Lorber, but it is also available digitally. I think through all your big platforms like Apple TV, Amazon, and all that. And definitely check it out. I had made a comparison earlier to, the films of Kelly Reichardt, and if you like kind of her vision of the West, I really think anyone out there listening would really appreciate what Maggie Greenwald did with the Ballad of Little Joe. And I'm just going to put it out there for anyone listening. I'd love to see you potentially return to the stories of the West if that's something you still have interest in.
I would love to. I've developed a few of them, but maybe one of them will get made.
Fingers crossed. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Really fun. Okay. Bye.
Bye. And then an extra special thanks to fellow podcaster and friend of the show, Austin Proctor, who actually had edited this episode. So if you want to support Austin Proctor and everything he does, be sure to check out the Frightmares podcast. I am a occasional co-host on that show, but he does one of my favorite podcasts about the horror genre, and it should be one of your favorite podcasts too. So thanks a lot for Austin Proctor for editing this episode.
The Shameless Picture Show is recorded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin and Easton, Maryland, and is hosted and produced by Nick Richards and Michael Viers. Today's episode was edited by Michael Viers. Our opening theme music was written especially for us by The Directionals, with narration by Zach McClain. The end credit music you're enjoying at the moment was generously provided by my friends in the band 10 Speed. The Shameless graphic design is masterfully done by Amanda Viers. An extra special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and to our generous sponsors. We are on Spotify, Stitcher Radio, iTunes, Google Play, and Libsyn. You can find links for all these amazing people in the description below.